Hello, my name's Simeon and this is my favourite books I read in the past year, 2022 edition. I'm going to go through all the books I read this year, including audiobooks, all the fiction anyway, in a very quick montage. I will give you some near misses that almost made my top 3 list but didn't quite make it, but I'd still recommend them. And then I'll discuss my top 3 books of 2022 that I read. They didn't necessarily come out in 2022. And hopefully that will give you some entertainment and maybe a recommendation. Right, and now for a quick montage of books I read this year. Okay, so some books I read this year that didn't make my top 3 that I still thought were amazing and I would recommend. The first one is Gideon the Ninth. How would I describe this book? I'll give you a quick summary. It's about space bone necromancers / swordswomen who kind of fight, and then I don't want to give spoilers, but you know, there's sort of are they fighting? Are they in love? What's going on here? Do they hate each other? Do they love each other? How's this going to work out? All while trying to solve a mystery involving bone magic, and it's absolutely bonkers but brilliant. The prose is fantastic. It's some of the best prose I've read, but it's mixed in with, you know, bawdy humour and kind of pop culture references. Yeah, and it was an absolute smash hit. I'm sure you've heard of it, but check it out if you've not read it. It's really good. The Night Manager. I wanted to read this book. It's by John le Carré because I saw the BBC series and that had Hugh Laurie and I always say Loki, but that's not actually his name. The actor who played Loki, Tom Hiddleston, that's who it had. And he's one of my favourite actors. They're both great, actually. I love both their stuff. And Hugh Laurie's also got a very good jazz album that's worth checking out. But as soon as I saw that series, I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. If you've not seen the series, check it out. But I wanted to read the book because of that series and it didn't disappoint. It was a really interesting read. John le Carré goes deep into characters' psyches and it's very compelling, very tense. It's a spy thriller, but without him actually being a spy. He's a hotel manager who kind of gets embroiled in this I don't want to say plot, but in this effort to take down the worst man in the world, Richard Roper. So I'd also recommend that one. Yeah, so next one is a classic, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. It's a horror classic, although it's not an outright gory horror. It's more along the psychological lines, and it's a really interesting story in itself. I really enjoyed it. I had this one as an audiobook. I was surprised by how long it was, but actually there's quite a lot of character work. I really liked what Bradbury did with the father in this book, bringing him into the story, because it's 2 boys who uncover the evilness of the carnival and kind of what's going on there. And I really liked how the story developed and the resolution it came to. I'd check this out if you like horror but not really gory horror. The next recommendation I have for you is an audiobook. So The Sandman Part 1 and 2. So you might have seen the Sandman series this year on Netflix, which I thought was really good, but I had a problem with the second half of the series in that because they were trying to get in so much stuff from the book, actually, some quite significant plot lines got discarded. So if you want to hear that series in a bit more depth as it was in the comics, I'd really give the audiobooks a listen. It's an excellent cast, excellent production, and you'll notice some differences from the TV series, but I think you'll probably, if you like the TV series, enjoy the differences and enjoy the extra depth in the storytelling that's there. My last on my recommendation list that didn't make my top one, I'm not saying I wouldn't recommend the other books, but the ones that really stood out to me was Skullduggery Pleasance, which was again quite bonkers, but I really enjoyed it. I know the series was quite big here in Britain. I don't know if it was big in America, but it's about a teenage girl who becomes the sidekick for a sorcerer skeleton who was once a wizard, and they solve mysteries together and predictably get embroiled in a plot of an evil wizard who wants to take over the world, kind of thing. And it was just really well done, like really well paced, really neat, a lot of clever world building done really succinctly. And yeah, it spawned a massive series, which I think has even been rebooted. And I've just read the first one. But if you want something a little out there that's, just fun and adventurous and not particularly taxing, I think this is a great one to check out. Right, so on to my top 3 now. I'm going to try and keep these as spoiler-free as I can. I know you said spoiler-free, but spoiler-free as I can, but there will be some minor spoilers in here. Okay, right, the first one, drum roll please. First book in my top 3 is My Heart is a Chainsaw by, I think it's Stephen Graham Jones, might be Stephen. You can leave that in the comments, let me know how wrong I am. But by Stephen or Stephen Graham Jones, who's produced many books. And this is the first of his I've actually read. So I was quite interested to read this because it was a breakout hit this year. So the story is actually about Jade, who's a disaffected American teen in this kind of quiet rural town that's being gentrified. Across the lake, rich people, mega tycoons are moving in and building all these wonderful new homes. And gentrification's a theme that kind of runs below the surface of the novel. Most of the novel is about Jade and her obsession with horror movies. It's like a love letter to horror films. Jade knows every slasher, and she has like this encyclopedic knowledge of the films and how they were made. And she's very much a loner. She doesn't view herself as the hero of the story, and quite often when she does something good in the story, someone else gets the credit, and it's kind of really sad. She's on her own, she smokes a lot and doesn't really trust people, and as the story goes on you kind of find out why that is. What's interesting is Jade gets the idea that a real life slasher has come to town. She's seeing patterns that match what's happened in all the horror films she's seen again and again and again. And she starts to believe that a new girl in town who's kind of, perfect and amazing is the final girl, the girl in the slasher films who's meant to stop the slasher. And Jade sets out to get this girl ready for stopping the slasher. The most exciting endings and one of the most unexpected ones I think I've read in a long time. I don't want to spoil it for you, but all these things kind of collide with each other and you get some unexpected results. I'll say that. It was heartfelt, it was sad. If you loved horror movies, you'll probably love this, and it was really exciting and unexpected, but it is a horror novel at its core, and there are some gory things in there, so just be advised of that before you read. Right, number 2 on my list. Now, I am going to have pronunciation problems here. If I say June, I'm not talking about the month of the year, I'm talking about this book that I read. So June, the absolute classic masterpiece of sci-fi novel by Frank Herbert, which I'd never read before, always wanted to read it. I was a little bit worried about tackling it because it is very long and I hadn't read much about it before or seen much about it. I think I watched the older version of the film once when I was young, but I don't really remember too much about it. And I was worried it was going to be kind of a huge novel of very dry sci-fi. I like sci-fi, but if it's too dry and technical, it kind of turns me off. I was very pleased to discover that this was not that. There's an underlying theme of mysticism in the book. So it's kind of like mysticism and religion meets futuristic sci-fi, and it's really, really interesting. So the main character, Paul Atreides, although you could argue his father, Duke Leto, is the main character to start with, but Paul is part of this household, this, I don't know if you'd use the word aristocratic, but this important household who are being given the task of managing the desert world Dune. Dune is very important because it has spice, which is this highly addictive substance that can only be mined on this planet. Dune also is very inhospitable and has giant sandworms that come out the ground and like eat people and destroy whole villages and things. So it's not the best place to be, but it's a very valuable planet. And it also has its own people, the Fremen, who can be quite hostile to outsiders. So this is going to be a tough task. Paul has been trained from a young age by his mother in the Bene Gesserit ways. And early on in the book, this is a minor spoiler, but it shouldn't spoil the book for you. We find out that Paul's mother hopes that he is the Kwisatz Haderach, which I hope I'm saying right, which is basically kind of a prophesied chosen one figure in her religion. And her religion has people all over the universe kind of pulling strings and working towards this goal of finding this person. At the same time, the book features quotes at the starts of sections from Princess Irulan, who is a character we do eventually get to meet in the book. And she's kind of quoting what's happening as history, which is really interesting and provides a lot of context and clues to the reader as to what's going on. So this is a book of kind of political agendas crossing, religious agendas crossing, shadowy figures behind the scenes, pulling strings, war, betrayal, coming of age, fulfilling your destiny, all those kind of things in this book. And it's set against this really well realized futuristic space world where technology doesn't necessarily just solve all your problems. There are real problems that technology can help with but can't solve. For example, if you live on Dune, because of the weather conditions and the lack of water, you have to wear a special still suit to preserve all your water in your body, and water becomes this really precious, almost sacred commodity. Be prepared for shocks, fights, betrayal, war, meditations on power, loyalty, duty, parental relationships, and quite a lot else. So this is an epic book, but it's one I would really recommend. It was worth the time, it was worth the effort. It's almost like a mind-expanding book. I really, really recommend it. And I haven't seen the new film yet, but I will be checking that out soon. So if you've seen that and you'd recommend that, let me know in the comments. Right, another drum roll, please. This is my #1 book I read in 2022. It's Piranesi, and I hope I'm saying that right. I was saying Piranesi for ages, but I think it's Piranesi. This one's by Susanna Clarke, who wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, that fantastic book, and then took 16 years to produce this book. And I believe she took about 10 years to write Strange and Norrell. She did produce some short stories in the meantime, but that's quite a long time between novels. This is an amazing book. It won, I think, the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2021, and I've heard people talk about it quite a lot, and I really wanted to read it, but I didn't get around to it till this year. Someone even said that it changes the perception of what a novel can be. So that's quite lofty praise. So let's get into it and see what we think. This book is about Piranesi, who's a character in a watery labyrinth. He's got memory troubles. We don't know much about how he got there or what he's doing there. He's very naive and affable and likable. He's actually one of the most likable protagonists I think I've ever read. And he spends his days kind of fishing and making things and taking care of the house. So he calls the building he's in the house, and he views it almost like a deity, like a living thing. Yeah, there's this really nice quote from the book. The beauty of the house is immeasurable, its kindness infinite. So that's kind of how he thinks of the house. The house provides for him, so he's going to look after the house. So he does things like he finds bones lying around and he tries to put them back together and keep them in nice order and keep them clean. And he finds things that don't really make sense. They're kind of from our world, like biscuit boxes, and not a lot of this is adding up. It's very slow burn and mysterious. We're kind of immersed into this watery world, and it's a very clever effect because it's a book about getting lost in a labyrinth that draws you in and allows you to get lost in the story like it's a labyrinth. It kind of reinforces what the main character is feeling, and I certainly felt a kind of deep sense of sympathy for him. The only other person in the house is called the Other, Piranesi calls him, and we don't know much about the Other. He meets with Piranesi kind of once a week. He's very intelligent but quite short with Piranesi and wants Piranesi to kind of find the hidden knowledge of the house. He's very keen on finding this hidden knowledge, and Piranesi's wants to help him and wants to be his friend because he's kind of the only person he can talk to, but at the same time he's not really concerned with the hidden knowledge. He just wants to look after the house, and he's kind of happy with how things are. So the book's written as Piranesi's diary. Now Piranesi has no idea what the date is, so he kind of makes up his own clever dating system. The name Piranesi is a name the Other has given him, and it refers to an Italian artist / architect who drew these amazing drawings of kind of very detailed labyrinth-like structures. And as the book goes on, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but we start to get a bit suspicious of the Other and what his motives might be. And also there's a bit of an unreliable narrator here because we learn that Piranesi's having trouble with his memory and not remembering everything. It's a gentle, slow burn read, but there's quite an intriguing mystery at the heart of it, which does get revealed and does get resolved really well, because that was my worry about reading this book. I thought, is this going to end up like Lost, where nothing really gets resolved or shown to us? And no, it's not like that. Susanna Clarke has a clear idea of what's going on here and ekes it out in just the right way. I think we find out as much as we need to know in each section to keep it really interesting and flowing, but still maintain that gentle, immersive feel, which is a real feat. I think it's a really ingenious book. It's quite a funny book. It's not quite as dry as Strange and Novel, and a lot of the humour comes from kind of Piranesi's naivete and trustingness, and just his view of the world, which is very different to our view. But it's a lovely humour that made me feel like, oh yeah, this is a childlike person. Wouldn't it be nice to be that innocent again? In terms of genre, it's very hard to pin down what genre this is. I'd say there's elements of urban fantasy to it. I'd say there's elements of paranormal to it. There's elements of mystery. I think it's kind of in a class of its own. It's a mix of genres and ideas that just is executed flawlessly. It works really well. The prose is lyrical and magical, yet not overly literary, and quite modern. Is a very joyful reading experience. Yeah, so I would really recommend this. I think it's an almost one-off experience. I don't think there are many books like this out there. I said before it won the Women's Prize for Fiction, but I wouldn't, say this is just women's fiction. I think anyone would enjoy this book, especially if you like magic, if you like fantasy, and you like a slow burn with a good mystery underneath. So those are my top books for 2022. Please do like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. And let me know what your top books of 2022 were in the comments, because I'd love some recommendations. Okay, goodbye.